Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marcia Butler. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and I do need to turn that feature on. So let me go ahead. All right, that feature is turned on, so you should be able to chat with us. Those are good for asking questions, making comments, and we really appreciate your interaction today. If you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it during today's presentation, go ahead and leave your contact information as well, and we'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Our presenter is Andy Rogers, and similar to the key role a mainspring plays in a precision timepiece, Andy enjoys playing a key role in his clients' financial lives. This means having difficult family conversations surrounding important financial decisions and providing a guiding hand through meaningful life choices that can impact generations to come. Andy appreciates long-lasting relationships built on core values, disciplined goals, and dreams of the future. Using real-world experience, Andy coaches clients through the early phases of accumulation into financial independence and beyond, priding himself on a refreshingly honest approach to modern wealth management. And Andy, I'm going to turn over the time to you. I'm excited to have you here. And I will say you look a little different than your headshot.
Thank you, Marcia. It's nice to be here. Yes, I lost the goatee and the glasses, so looking a little different than the intro photo. So maybe I'll have to get a photographer in here at some point and get a new headshot.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you for the awesome introduction. Yes, we have helped a lot of people with retirement, and a lot of what retirement planning is all about is knowing whether or not you're ready. And so a lot of times we're wondering to ourselves, can we go into our boss's office, or maybe we're a business owner, should we start to plan our exit strategy? Do we have enough money? How are we going to generate income if we're no longer working? Tons of questions that go into retirement planning. So just knowing whether or not you're ready to retire is half the battle. And many times that happens, for our clients in their early 50s, sometimes 40s, maybe even 30s. So planning for the next 30 years, 60 years. I just turned 50 recently. So, if I get out to 80, 90 years old, that's 30 or 40 years that I have to plan for. I'm not quite ready to retire yet, but have helped people in their 50s retire early. Comes up a lot lately about, Andy, can I afford to retire early? Especially here in Seattle, Washington, where we have a lot of technology folks, and they're doing really well financially. They still want to know, am I going to be able to retire? So for that, we've created this framework. This is a roadmap, and there's 9 different phases. 9 different steps, but there's 3 phases. So the 3 main phases are building a real solid foundation at the bottom, Many times that's going to involve just understanding what things are going to look like in retirement. What do you want your income to look like? Where are you now? It's really hard to get to where you want to be if you don't really know where you are at the moment, right? So, and then addressing risks. What are the things that could possibly take place that might hurt you in the future and possibly ruin your financial plan? We want to make sure that at least we've had a conversation about that and addressed those topics. And then in phase 2, we move up to your finances, where we talk about taxation, things like investments. I grew up in the 90s as a stockbroker, so I used to day trade stocks all day, and now things have slowed down a lot. Things are a lot different in the stock market. So now we work primarily with mutual funds and 401ks and things like that. But also real estate. How does your primary residence, do you have rental properties? How does that stuff factor into your retirement planning? Then going into phase 3, when we're talking about the future, we're going to be thinking about Social Security or Medicare, or do we have a pension? How are we going to generate income if we're no longer working, like we mentioned? Part of that is also having your estate documents in place. So many times when I meet folks and they want to talk about financial planning, the first question I ask is, do you have a will? And just really basic things like powers of attorney, and making sure that all that stuff is in order and that it's being checked in on recently or frequently. And then leaving a legacy. One of the most exciting things about my career and helping people with retirement planning is, what is this going to look like if you're no longer here? Possibly being able to affect generations to come. Are you a philanthropist? Do you want to have a charitable organization, or are there things that you'd like to see prosper in the future when you're no longer here? That's always very exciting. I love it when clients give gifts and do that during their lifetime, because it's really exciting to see people when they receive those gifts as well. So that's kind of our 9 steps. And so Marche is going to help me with the slides here. So Marche, I appreciate you hosting. And so we're going to talk about the foundation. And a lot of times that foundation is just basic goal setting. What are things going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? So many times when I meet somebody, for the first time, they don't have a goal. They have never written any of this stuff down. And so my job a lot of times is just to get some of the stuff out of your head and get you to write it down. So we have a framework for goals, and they're called SMART goals. And if you're not familiar with SMART goals, they're goals that are simple, very specific. They're going to be measurable. So there's going to be some sort of component where we can measure whether or not you've achieved that goal. They're going to be attainable. So it's going to be something that we know you can do in the next, 6 to 12 months, or possibly a year or two. They're going to be relevant to your situation, and they're going to be relevant to your vision of the future. And they're also going to have a time element. So a lot of times you're going to have homework, and that homework is going to have some sort of measurement, and it's going to have a measurement of a dollar value and a time value. So those SMART goals are super important. We write those things down, we get them out of our head. And then we also don't want our clients to be scared to dream, right? So dreams are big goals that most people will probably say are possibly even unachievable. So stuff that you think about in the future where, when you tell it to somebody, they go, oh, that's crazy, Andy, you're never going to be able to do that. So a lot of times when we're dreaming, those are the exciting things for us. We love it when we have haters, right? So we want somebody to hate on our dreams, because that's the fire we need to get going and to move forward and to achieve some of those dreams, just so you can tell people that you did it, right? So dreams are just a series of goals that we line up one goal after the other to get you to that bigger dream. What's that bigger vision? And I always tell people my favorite dream is.
Oh, okay.
Oh, go ahead, Marche.
I was going to ask, what are some common goals that people are coming into with? And then I would love to hear what one of your favorite dreams is here.
Yeah. So, a typical retirement plan, we have Andy, I would like to retire at age 65, and I would like to have $1 million in my portfolio, and I would like to have $70,000 a year in income for the rest of my life. I'm going to live to be 95 years old. And so those are very specific. It's very measurable. It's attainable. It's relevant to what you want to do in the future. And also there's that time element. So if you're 55 and you want to retire when you're 65, then you've got 10 years to put that plan together. And that's what we're going to do is, look at that plan. And then a dream, for example, I always laugh because my wife thinks I'm nuts. I tell my wife all the time, I'm going to have a flying car before I die. And so, and she thinks I'm crazy, but at some point in time, I would love to have a flying car. And people, I see them now on the internet, it's possible. But that's something I like to dream about, and probably going to be pretty expensive to get a flying car, but we'll see. So
maybe drive one at least, right?
I got to have a test drive first. Yeah. So taking an inventory, like I said earlier, if you don't know where you are today, it's going to be very difficult for you to set goals and figure out where you want to be in the future. So we're going to take an inventory, and that's going to be, what is your income? What are your expenses? If you add up all the assets, everything that you have that has some sort of value to it, and then you subtract out what you owe other people or banks or things like that, then you're going to have this cash flow analysis. So we're going to want to do an inventory of your cash flow. I use the word budget, but clients don't like it when I use the word budget. That has a negative connotation. So now we just use the word cash flow. So cash flow is income, expenses, and then your net worth is going to be your assets minus your liabilities. So we're going to take a very accurate snapshot. We're going to be super honest with ourselves. There's going to be no lying about some of this stuff. You can't be making things up. You really have to know where you're at, and then you have to be really honest about where you want to be in the future. So again, net worth and just keeping track of that is what we help our clients with a lot, especially when markets are doing this. A lot of times our clients are like, Andy, my portfolio is way down, and then we check in on their net worth, and their net worth is higher than it's ever been in their lives. So because we've got different assets and they're moving in different directions at different times, if we're always checking in and making sure that we know where we're at, then it's going to be much easier for us to get to where we want to be. And we tend to check in on our clients, not only their budgets, but their net worth. And we do that probably several times a year. So, risks. Nobody likes to talk about risk. What could happen, Andy? Oh my gosh, we forgot to think about that. And many times that has to do with healthcare. So none of this money stuff means anything if you don't have your health. So a lot of times we take an approach with our clients about wealth and wellness. We're always going to be making sure that our clients have great healthcare. We want to have some sort of life insurance. I joke around with my wife, and she doesn't really think it's funny, but I tell her I'm worth a lot more dead than alive. And the reason that I have it set up like that is because if something happens to me, I want her to be taken care of. I want my kids to be taken care of, and possibly my kids' kids to be taken care of in the future. So insurance, I don't like talking about insurance as much as the next person, but you can insure everything, your car. So you want to make sure you have good property casualty insurance. A lot of times that includes an umbrella policy. So if you've got multiple cars, multiple houses, multiple relationships, multiple kids, you want to have this umbrella policy in place that's going to cover above and beyond your insurance policy if you do get in an accident and somebody goes to sue you for your house, for example. So property casualty is very important. Life insurance, we already mentioned. I'm a big proponent of disability and long-term care insurance. And the reason I think disability insurance is important is I've been disabled in my lifetime, and I highly don't recommend it. It's horrible. So there's a 50-50 shot as to whether or not you're going to become disabled before you pass away. So do we cover that risk, or do we just wing it and try and make sure that we have enough money to pay for that. If something happens to me and I can no longer work, who's going to cover our mortgage, for example? So right now that kind of lands on my wife, but I also have disability insurance that says if Andy's no longer working, I'm going to get his paycheck anyways, and hopefully I recover from that. Long-term care is a little different. I'm a big proponent of long-term care, and most people don't know that if Medicare stops paying, then you have to use your own money to fund your nursing needs. So we're talking when you're 70, 80, 90 years old, most people don't know that Medicare stops paying when something permanent happens to you. And in my family, that was Alzheimer's. So when my grandmother got Alzheimer's and she could no longer remember who I was and who my dad was, Medicare stopped paying at the same time and made her spend down her retirement assets until she was broke. So again, these are things that have happened to me in my life, experiences that I've had with clients. And so we want to address those risks so that in the future, things like that don't happen to you and your family. So moving on to finances, this is the second phase, and minimizing taxes is super important. We're going from right to left on this slide, so it's a little awkward, I know, but minimizing taxes, the number one drag on wealth is going to be the IRS. They will come at you from all angles if you let them. And we want to make sure that you are being as tax efficient as possible. So we want to minimize your tax liabilities on your income. Anything where you buy it, and if it grows in value and you sell it, the IRS is going to want to take their cut of that. That's called capital gains. There's also estate taxes. So what happens if you pass away and you have more than a certain dollar amount? For example, I live in the state of Washington here, and we have a state estate tax. And if you pass away with over 2.1 million, the state of Washington will step in and start taxing your family before that money ever goes to your family. And so there's things you can do to plan for that can possibly get around that. But if you don't know about it, then you can't cover it. So we want to make sure that you understand current tax laws. Do you have your retirement savings in the right type of account? Are there ways that we can be more tax efficient? If you decide to retire early, can we convert money from your 401k into a Roth IRA so that account is tax-free for the rest of your life? Anything that we can do to get around or use any existing loopholes that the IRS still allows us to use, we want to be able to do that. And many times the way we do that is we work with a really good accountant. So I'm not an accountant, I'm not giving tax advice, but I work hand in hand with those accountants to make sure that my clients are as tax efficient as possible so that the IRS isn't slowing us down when it comes to growing our net worth and getting to that goal that we set for ourselves. The next thing is investments. So a lot of times when we're retired, we want to use our investments for growth. We want to make that money grow, but we also need to generate income. So just understanding how to generate income, protecting your existing investments, and allowing for growth in the future, all very important stuff. Those things, if we're talking about diversified portfolios, things like stocks have growth potential. Stocks can also produce income in the form of dividends. Then there's things like bonds, where what a bond is you've loaned money to somebody or a corporation or the government, and they're going to pay you interest that generates income as well. So how much stock should I have in my portfolio versus how much bonds should I have in my portfolio? How much cash do I need for my emergency savings? What am I going to need to live on for the next 6 to 12 months? Anything beyond that, we need to be growing or getting some interest on that money, because things are getting more expensive year over year over year. And so we need to keep up with that inflation, or else that's how clients can run out of money. So we're going to always work with a qualified investment professional. I'm a CFP, so if you're looking for financial planner, a lot of times you can look for a certified financial planner. They go through some extra processes that allow them to be a fiduciary all a fiduciary means is that I'm putting my clients' as best interest before my own. Anytime I'm talking about investments, I'm always trying to do the right thing for my clients and also reduce the cost and expenses that go into investing and things like that. So a CFP is highly recommended. Oh, alternatives. I love this stuff. This is the fun stuff to talk about for me. Real estate. So my grandfather was my mentor, and he was a real estate guy, and he loved properties. And so he had multiple buildings where he was generating income from the rent and things like that. Unfortunately, my grandfather had a horrible financial plan, and he started to have heart attacks and strokes in his mid-50s. And by the time he was 65, he had sold all those buildings and, basically was broke. So, again, these things are important. As I've experienced that in my life and in my family, I want to protect those things from happening to my clients. And a lot of times that means just having a good plan in place. What happens if I do get sick? Do I have real estate, and should I sell it? Nowadays, there's digital assets, right? So I'm a big fan of things like domain names, where, if you own a website and you actually have the physical domain name, then there's a property there. That property may have some value. What is it worth? Does anyone in your family know what it's worth? If something happens to you, how do they know how to access that and possibly get rid of it or capitalize on what you've created that's digital? And that may, include things like, cryptocurrencies and things like that as well. Physical commodities, so gold, silver, that type of stuff is coming up a lot recently. Coins, art collections. One of my friends is a painter here in Seattle, and I've got a couple of his paintings. They weren't worth a lot when I originally bought them, but I feel like they're worth more now. So how do we know how much those things are worth? And if the stock market's doing this, hopefully your real estate is just steadily climbing versus everything moving up and down at the same time. So just being diversified, using alternative assets to diversify those ups and downs, a lot of times can make our clients' lives much easier and not seem as scary. Oh, future. Okay, well, here we go. Let's see. So for the future, generating income, we talked a little bit about showing up and possibly telling somebody that you no longer are going to be working. And that's a scary thing, right? So we've had big, huge parties for our clients where we've invited their friends and coworkers, and sometimes people want to do it in silence. They're very quiet about it, and they just kind of want to ride off into the sunset. So going back to those goals, what do you want that to look like for you? Right? Do you see yourself traveling the world? My wife and I talk a lot about going to Europe, and we want to go to Paris and Spain. And when we're no longer working, we're going to be traveling abroad. And so we're probably going to end up downsizing some of the stuff that we have here in Seattle and not moving to another country, but spending a lot of time in other countries. Or do you want to be a homebody? Do you want to just kind of hang out at your house and, maybe you've already traveled. Maybe your job is traveling and you don't want to travel anymore. You just want to hang out at the house and watch TV. That we've got clients that have all the spectrum, right? They want to be a homebody, or a lot of times here on the West Coast, they want to sell everything and like jump in an RV and just, tour around the United States. So what do these goals look like for you, and how are you going to generate income when you're no longer working to pay for all that stuff? So you control the timing and you control what that looks like, but working with a professional to try and come up with a plan. So every year when you're taking money out of your retirement account, how is that going to affect your taxes? Which account should you take money out of first? If you have a pension, how can you maximize that? When should you take Social Security? Do you know how to sign up for Medicare? And do you know the penalties if you don't sign up on time? So there's just a ton of things to think about when it comes to generating income and retirement. So what you need to do is everything we've talked about so far, you need to have all that in documented form, all compiled in one place. And it really helps to put that all into a tool that allows you to check in on things frequently. So we happen to use financial planning software. The company I'm probably not going to say the company in particular, but there's plenty of softwares out there and professionals that can help you do that. Again, a lot of this stuff is something that I do all day, every day, because it's my job. But for most folks that have been working for a living, probably for the last 40 or 50 years, some of this stuff may seem real overwhelming. And how are you going to pay for things if you're no longer generating an income from a job? And then we're going to check on that stuff. We're going to make adjustments as things change. As you can see what happened recently with the government, things are crazy, right? So the debt ceiling issue that popped up recently, that was brand new, and this is something that's happened in the past, but it overshadowed all the inflation stuff that we've been dealing with for the last 6 to 12 months. So you've got things like inflation, debt ceiling issues. How do I manage my portfolio when all this crazy stuff is happening? We've got a war in Ukraine, we've got China tensions, all these different things. How can I not only manage my income in retirement, but how do I move forward and how do I really plan for that income? And then we run these what if scenarios. Well, what if, I do end up sick or I do end up with Alzheimer's? How am I going to pay for things then? My pension and my Social Security maybe is not going to be enough. How much in my retirement accounts am I going to have to take out every year? And we always want to err on the side of caution. I like the way they threw that in there. I'm always going to err on the side of caution when it comes to a financial plan. We never want to tell ourselves that this is something that it's not. And if we don't have enough money there, we definitely we can put off retirement. If we know we're not going to have enough income, like I've got a pretty high budget and I want to stick with that. And if I retired today, I probably would run out of money in my lifetime. So I'm going to have to put that date and push it back. Next slide, I believe, is estate document. So like I said, if you don't have a will, highly recommend it. You're doing your family a disservice. Some folks on this webinar may not have families, but just having documents in place, COVID taught us a lot about that. There were some issues that were happening at hospitals and things like that, where if you showed up and you didn't have medical powers of attorney in place, things became very difficult from a treatment perspective as to who got treated first. So basic powers of attorney are super important, both financial and medical. A will is super important. Here in the state of Washington, if you want to avoid some of those Washington state estate taxes, you may consider setting up what's called a bypass trust. Bypasses the state of Washington and goes directly to your family. Things like medical directives. What happens if I'm on a ventilator? Do they keep it on or do they turn it off? And so that stuff can all be spelled out in your estate documents. And then a lot of times things change. So, you've got in-laws and ex-spouses and kids from different relationships and things like that. How do you want those things to play out if something were to happen to you? And then making sure that your advisors and your estate attorneys have copies of those so that somebody knows what your wishes are if you're not able to, say anything. Leaving the legacy. So I won't take up too much time with this, but I think it's one of the most exciting parts about my job. Again, what I said earlier is when people start to plan and include the kids, and sometimes the kids as kids. So I have some families where I'm working with 4 generations of a single family. I'm working with the great-grandparents and the parents and the parents of the parents and the tiniest of the tiny kids. So what does that look like for you? What does that look like for your family? you control how things are passed on, and you also control the narrative as to why things are the way they are. And sometimes that includes things like expectations of the next generation. I know a lot of times folks, they want to leave money to the kids, but maybe the kids are not responsible yet. And so they put different ages in there. Hey, if you've got a college degree and you attain age 25, then we leave this chunk of money comes your way, and that's meant for a down payment on a house, for example. So there's a lot of different ways to leave a legacy for family. And also on the charitable side, it's exciting. The family I was working with earlier today, no kids and really nobody to leave money to. So they're very charitably inclined. They think about what organizations, both locally and nationally, do they want to participate in, and even internationally. So if you grew up in a certain community and you like that community and you want to give back, whether that's time or money, if you're no longer working and you're ready for retirement and you've retired and you've hung out and kind of, re-energized yourself, getting out there and doing good things in the community, both with your time and your money, can make huge impact. And so having some sort of family mission statement in place that's just written out, it's not really a will, it's not really a trust, but it's something that states, here's my story, here's my family's story, and here's how, if in the future I'm no longer here, here's how I would like things to live. Super important too. So leaving a legacy is fun, in my world anyways, but it's definitely part of retirement planning and knowing whether or not you're ready to retire. So, final thoughts. So Marche and I were talking about this before the webinar, and my final thoughts on this is I went over a ton of stuff with you guys today, and I literally just scratched the surface. So some of these things, I could probably do a full 1-hour webinar just on one individual topic inside of the investment portfolio, right? So in order to get this stuff out of your head and into a place where you actually have a written plan, a lot of times it helps to work with a professional. I know, as a person that doesn't like to humble himself and ask for help very often, whether that's asking for directions or, bringing in somebody that's not me to learn about my situation is sometimes I got to set my ego aside to do that. But it's much easier on some of this stuff if you're working with a trusted advisor that understands investments and taxes and estate planning and all that stuff at the same time. Again, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an attorney, but I work very well with those folks to make sure that we represent you. You have a team that is in place. That way you can go out and sell everything and jump in the RV and travel down to Utah and maybe not talk to anybody for the next 6 months. So again, retirement planning is very individual. Working with Marche and the people at Advice Chaser, their job is to connect you with a financial professional. So if this stuff does sound overwhelming and you're kind of going, Andy, that's a lot. You just went over there. By all means, get a hold of the folks at Advice Chaser and they'll be happy to connect you directly with an advisor. Again, certified financial planners or somebody that is has some extra education in this sort of thing is very helpful. And I think that's it for me, Marche.
Great. We do have some questions that came in, so I want to go ahead and address those before we end out today. So one of the questions that came in is, can you talk a little bit more about what people need to do to prepare for a possible disability kind of event in their life, health or otherwise? I know you had mentioned that a little bit, but it sounds like you have a lot of experience there.
Yeah, unfortunately, my story is very direct there. I was I have early onset arthritis. So when I was in my 20s, all of a sudden my joints started to get swollen up and I was having trouble walking. And so at that point in time, I was in this type of career. I was in my late 20s and, was making good money. And all of a sudden I was having trouble showing up in the morning. And I did not have anything in place at that point. So disability insurance is a policy that you can put in place that says, okay, if Andy has early onset arthritis, does he have something that's going to at least give him a paycheck so that he doesn't lose his house and he's got something at least to cover his mortgage while he tries to recover from whatever this thing is. So disability insurance is not fun to buy. It's definitely one of those things that now that I'm no longer disabled, I have one in place because if that ever happens to me again, I want to make sure that my wife is able to take care of our mortgage without selling the house. So that would just mean going and working with a disability insurance professional, getting a quote and seeing whether it makes sense for you to cover that risk with a monthly premium. And a lot of times that can be done through your workplace as well. So there's a lot of workplace plans that offer disability insurance. And it just covers a certain percentage of your salary for a certain period of time. Typically, that's going to be 1 or 2 years of like 60% of your salary, just as an example. And to stay on that subject, long-term care is a little different. Long-term care insurance is way down the road. Let's say you're retired and you've been retired for 20 years. All of a sudden, like my grandmother, you end up with a dementia or something like that, and Medicare stops paying out. Do you have a policy in place that actually starts to pay your caregiver, whether that's, if you want to age in place? A lot of my clients, they say, Andy, I'm going to live in this house for the rest of my life. I'm just going to have somebody come here and take care of me. Long-term care insurance pays premium. You pay a premium, and then all of a sudden that thing is paying your caregiver directly. And can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement accounts. So that's kind of how that works.
All right, switching topics here. The question was about how much growth is expected, like on average, when in your retirement account. You talked about like having growth in your retirement savings even when you retire. Can you talk a little bit about like what percentage to kind of expect?
Sure. Yeah, so I recommend a book by a mentor of mine, Jeremy Siegel. And Jeremy Siegel wrote a book called Stocks for the Long Run. And Stocks for the Long Run, in that book, if you look back at the history of the stock market, the stocks have averaged anywhere between 5 and 7% for the longest time, like 100+ years. So you can expect 5 to 7%, and it's going to go up and down. But if you look at a long-term chart of the stock market, which you can Google that right now, just pull up long-term chart of the stock market, stocks for the long run. And yeah, the stock market has returned roughly between 5 and 7%. Bonds a little bit less than that. So right now, they recently increased interest rates. And so interest rates are no longer at 0, which is fantastic. And that means you can actually go out and find something that is relatively safe that's going to pay you anywhere from 3 to 6%. And we've got money market funds and things like that are paying 5 at the moment. So, so that's relatively safe compared to stocks. So that's kind of the answer to that.
Here's another question. Do you recommend dividend paying stocks to generate monthly or quarterly income? And then there's a part 2 to this question. Or do you take out about 4% each year from your stocks and bonds portfolio, or a mix of some sort? Can you talk about like, I guess, withdrawal strategy and then also dividends?
Yeah, that's a great question and very detailed. Like I said, I could do a 1 hour just on that. So 4% is kind of a recommended maximum withdrawal rate. So I think that's probably where that person heard that. Dividend paying stocks are fantastic. They've done extremely well over time. Think about big boring companies that pay really good dividends. It makes the growth of that company even more important because they're actually paying you quarterly. And the growth there, as a company turns from a growth company into more of a value company. We've all heard of Warren Buffett, right? So Warren Buffett, kind of a smart dude about money. And so he invests only in really good dividend paying stocks. And he looks specifically for those types of companies that are going to pay him regardless of whether or not the company grows. And that's a good strategy to have as an investor, kind of follow what things like Warren Buffett is doing. So I think one of his top holdings right now is Apple Computer. And if you look at Apple this year, it's done extremely well. It doesn't pay a huge dividend, but it does pay you better than your bank is going to pay you to put money there. And it has the ability to grow. And everyone's doing this.
Yep. Can you talk a little bit about like holding single stocks versus ETFs, mutual funds, things like that?
Yeah, it's very individualized, right? So we typically have a larger portfolio that may contain hundreds of stocks. So the S&P 500 is 500 of the largest companies in the country. So if you like all those companies, you just buy the S&P 500 and you own 500 stocks. So super easy. But if you do believe that a certain portion of those companies are going to do better than others, like dividend paying stocks, then you can always buy S&P 500 dividend paying stocks. So there's an ETF for that. Individual stock picking. Like I said, I grew up in the 90s and was a stockbroker, and it's pretty hard to do nowadays. But, if there's something you like, I do like to tailor some of that stuff to my clients' likes. For example, I'm working with a young man right now who has a YouTube channel, and he knows YouTube. So I said, well, why don't we own some Google stock? Because YouTube is produced by Google. So if there's something that my client knows about, likes about, and they trust it, a lot of times those individual companies can be a really good thing, but it can also, you have to be right.
Or at least have, I guess, a diversified enough portfolio that if the stock gets dinged, you're not hurting too much. It was kind of like you were saying before, your investments may be down, but your net worth is grown.
Yeah, like last year, being here in the Northwest, we're not huge fans of, we're very, how should I say it, environmentally friendly. And so last year, if you were invested in big oil stocks, you would have made a bunch of money. So all the oil stocks went like this, everything else went like that. And so, if you owned Exxon or Chevron, you probably would have done pretty well last year. Well, none of my clients really own that. But last year, those companies would have done well. This year, not so much. So you have to kind of know, and your timing has to be correct. A lot of times my job is just to keep my clients invested and not so much hit it out of the park, but just stay the course and look at the plan and stick to the plan. That's where clients really get off, is they think they need to be making changes all the time, and really doing nothing a lot of times is sometimes the best thing to do.
All right. And then one final question before we end here. You talked about planning software. Can you talk a little bit about, we had a question about whether or not that is something that people do on their own, or if that kind of planning is always with a financial advisor. Sure.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of software out there now that's available for individuals. The thing that I think I brought this up earlier too is the ego. A lot of times gets in the way there, and if you're being really honest with yourself and you're doing it alone, what happens again if something happens to you? Are you including your spouse in using that software, or yeah, if you search financial planning softwares, there's some really good ones out there that are free. A lot of times those free softwares are going to be the reason behind that is they're trying to direct you towards a financial advisor that can help you use that software. So, you know, as an answer to that, yes, you can do all this stuff yourself. Do I recommend it? Well, it's kind of why I have a job. You know, some of my clients, they like to do it themselves, and then they just come and check their work through me. And, you know, so I make sure that they're doing the right thing from a planning perspective. And then they have their own portfolio where they're managing their own investments and things like that. But, you know, having a professional check your work is always recommended. So
that's interesting. It kind of reminds me of like a lot of other things, you know, having a professional as a consultant can work, having a professional who does it all for you, but you're just there to help make all the decisions, get educated about it so you can make this. So it sounds like there's a wide range of involvement depending on where your client is.
Yeah, if your situation is complex, you know, if you're a business owner and you've got a business on one side, you've got your family on the other side, and you've got your employees over here, and you've got your grandkids over here, all that stuff's very hard to do all by yourself. It can be done, don't get me wrong, but just to have somebody to bounce ideas off of and make sure that you're making good decisions, because life is going to throw curveballs at you, and you know, you have to be ready for them when they come. So having those what if scenarios worked out is what the planning software helps us with a lot. But if you don't know what to look for and you don't have the what if scenarios in the software, like my grandfather, you just end up selling everything going broke because nobody knew what his plan was. He didn't share it with anybody. You know, he was just a person from the Depression era. They kept their cards very close to the vest. They didn't share with other people because money was something that was not to be talked about. So I don't recommend that strategy, and I recommend sharing it with a trusted advisor and talking with your kids as well. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for that answer there. We're going to go ahead and close out here. We did get one question about if we're going to provide a recording link for listening later. Absolutely. We have been recording this, and we will be sending a link to the replay to your email in about a day. So look to that, and you're welcome to share that with your friends and family. We will also be posting this on our website as well. Well, on behalf of Advice Chaser, we want to thank you for being here, Andy. We want to thank the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. Here at Advice Chaser, as Andy had mentioned, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners is committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Well, once again from Advice Chaser, thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.